The snow fell gently, blanketing the remains of what once was a bustling New England town square. A skeletal frame of the old clock tower stood against the overcast sky, its hands frozen at midnight, a stark reminder of the fire that had consumed everything 5 years ago on New Year's Eve. Lila adjusted her scarf against the biting wind, her boots crunching over icy ash that still clung to the earth beneath the snow. She had returned home for the first time since the disaster, her heart heavy with memories of the town's annual New Year's Eve bonfire. It was a celebration that brought everyone together, music, laughter, and a roaring fire in the center of the square. Lila sat down across from her. Tonight, the square was silent. The charred remains of buildings loomed like ghosts, their blackened timbers jutting out at odd angles. Lila's breath fogged in the air as she approached the heart of the ruins, where she once danced with her friends, their faces glowing in the firelight. As she reached the center, a faint sound stopped her in her tracks. It was almost too soft to catch, like the rustle of fabric or the whisper of a name carried on the wind. Lila turned, her pulse quickening. The snow muffled all sound, yet there it was again, clearer this time. A low, mournful murmur, as if the ashes themselves were speaking. Her eyes darted to the remnants of the bonfire pit. The snow-covered ground was smooth, undisturbed, but something beneath it began to glow faintly, a dull orange pulse that quickened like the heartbeat of something long forgotten. Lila had sworn she'd never return to Ashwood. The fire that had gutted the town had also taken her parents, leaving her with nothing but memories and a sense of profound loss. Yet, on this New Year's Eve, something had compelled her to come back. A restless feeling she couldn't shake, like an unfinished chapter begging to be read. Her old home, or what was left of it, lay just a few blocks from the square. She'd spent her childhood in that modest 2-story house, its wide porch strung with Christmas lights every December. Now it was a pile of charred rubble buried beneath snowdrifts. Lila didn't stop there. She couldn't. The years following the fire had been a blur of grief and futile attempts to rebuild her life elsewhere. She moved to Boston, throwing herself into her studies and then her career. But the memories of Ashwood lingered, vivid and haunting, especially of that final New Year's Eve. The town's bonfire celebration had been a cherished tradition. Lila remembered the crowd gathered in the square, bundled in coats and scarves, faces lit by the flickering flames. Her parents had been there, laughing and singing along with the band. The fire had started suddenly, a spark that roared to life and consumed everything in minutes. Some blamed the wind, others whispered of sabotage. But no one ever found the cause. Tonight, standing in the ruins of the square, Lila felt the weight of that night pressing down on her. She wasn't sure what she had hoped to find here. Closure, perhaps, or answers to the questions that had plagued her since the fire. As the evening wore on, the wind picked up, carrying with it a strange, acrid scent that reminded her of burning wood. Lila pulled her coat tighter around her and glanced toward the remains of the bonfire pit. Snow covered the ground, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was stirring beneath the surface. She crouched down, brushing away the snow with gloved hands. The ashes beneath were dry and black, untouched by the dampness of the snow. And then she saw it. A shard of charred wood, its surface etched with strange, curling symbols. She picked it up, her fingers tingling as though the wood was faintly warm to the touch. "What the hell is this?" she murmured, holding the fragment closer. The whisper came again, faint but undeniable. This time it was clearer, almost like a voice speaking her name. Lila whipped around, her heart pounding, but the square was empty. Shadows stretched long and thin in the moonlight, and the skeletal clock tower loomed above her, its broken face eerily watchful. Lila pocketed the shard and hurried back to her car, her unease growing with every step. She told herself it was just her imagination, the whispers, the glowing ashes. But deep down, she knew better. Ashwood had always been a strange place, even before the fire. Growing up, she'd heard the stories from her parents and neighbors, tales of voices in the woods, of shadows moving where there shouldn't be any. The town's founders had built it on land said to be cursed, though no one ever explained by what or whom. Lila had dismissed those stories as small-town folklore meant to scare kids into behaving. But now, standing in the ruins, she wasn't so sure. Back in her car, she turned the key and the engine sputtered to life. The radio crackled, static filling the air, before a voice broke through, a local news broadcast. 5 years since the fire that destroyed Ashwood's historic square. Authorities have never determined the cause, though some survivors claim to have seen strange lights and heard voices in the moments before the blaze began. Lila's stomach churned as she reached for the volume knob. Before she could turn it down, the static returned, louder this time, and the voice on the radio changed. "Come back," it whispered, faint and crackling. "We remember you." The car stalled, plunging her into silence. Lila sat frozen, her breath fogging the windshield. She fumbled with the keys, trying to restart the engine, but it wouldn't budge. The whisper came again, this time from somewhere outside the car, faint and melodic, like a distant lullaby. Her eyes darted to the square. The snow glowed faintly in the moonlight, and for a moment, she thought she saw figures moving among the ruins, dark shapes flickering at the edge of her vision. "No," she muttered, gripping the steering wheel, "this isn't real." But when she looked down, the shard of wood in her lap was glowing faintly, the etched symbols pulsing with a dull orange light. Lila's pulse thundered in her ears as the faint orange glow from the shard grew stronger. It was almost hypnotic, like the embers of a dying fire being rekindled. The strange whispers outside her car seemed to ebb and flow with the glow, as if the two were connected. Gritting her teeth, she grabbed the shard, intending to toss it out of the car. But the moment her fingers closed around it, a sudden wave of heat surged through her hand. It wasn't painful, but it stopped her cold. Images flickered through her mind. People gathered in the square, faces she didn't recognize, illuminated by an enormous bonfire. The crowd's expressions weren't joyous or celebratory. They were somber, almost reverent, as they stared into the flames. Among them, a woman dressed in a long, dark coat stood apart, her hands outstretched toward the fire. Her lips moved as if chanting words Lila couldn't hear, her gaze locked onto something within the flames. The vision disappeared as quickly as it had come, leaving Lila gasping for air. The shard no longer glowed, but it felt heavier in her palm, as if it were holding something unseen. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a low, steady hum that seemed to emanate from the ruins of the bonfire pit. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was calling her back to the square. With trembling hands, she opened the car door. The cold night air bit at her cheeks as she stepped out, clutching the shard tightly. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she approached the pit, every step weighted with a growing sense of inevitability. The hum grew louder as she neared the center of the square. The pit, once a simple stone circle used for town gatherings, seemed deeper now, its edges jagged and uneven. A faint orange light flickered within, barely visible through the snow and ash. Lila hesitated at the edge, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She held the shard up, its etched symbols glowing faintly once more. The pit responded, the light within growing brighter, pulsing in time with the shard. She leaned closer, peering into the depths. At first, she saw nothing but ash and debris. Then, something moved. A hand, skeletal and charred, emerged from the pit, clawing at the edge as though trying to pull itself free. Lila stumbled back, a scream lodged in her throat. Another hand appeared, followed by a head, its skull-like visage wreathed in faint, flickering flames. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't real." But the figure climbed out, its movement slow and deliberate. It stood upright, towering over her, its hollow eyes burning with an unnatural light. The whispers returned, louder this time, coming from every direction. "They remember you," the voices said in unison. Lila turned to run, but her feet felt as though they were mired in quicksand. The figure stepped closer, its skeletal hand reaching toward her. She squeezed her eyes shut, clutching the shard against her chest, as if it could protect her. The heat surged again, stronger this time, and the whispers grew chaotic, overlapping into an incomprehensible din. When she opened her eyes, the figure had stopped, its burning gaze fixed on the shard. "You carry the mark," it said, its voice a low, crackling rumble like wood consumed by fire. "What do you want?" Lila managed to choke out, her voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, its hollow eyes narrowing. To finish what was started. Before she could respond, the figure raised its hand, and the air around her ignited. Flames erupted in a circle, cutting off her escape. The shard in her hand burned brighter, the etched symbols glowing white-hot. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The flames vanished, the figure dissolved into ash, and the pit returned to its dormant state. Lila collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. The shard was cool to the touch once more, its glow fading into darkness. But the whispers hadn't stopped. They were quieter now, almost pleading. "Find the truth," they said, "before it's too late." Lila remained on her knees, the icy snow beneath her soaking through her jeans. Her hands trembled as she stared at the shard, its dark surface now devoid of any glow or heat. Yet the words of the whispers lingered in her mind, weaving a thread of unease through her thoughts. Find the truth. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and glanced back at her car. The idea of leaving, of driving away and pretending none of this had happened, was tempting. But deep down she knew she couldn't. Something tied her to this place, a connection she didn't understand but couldn't deny. Taking a deep breath, Lila pocketed the shard and turned toward the town hall. The imposing building stood at the far end of the square, its darkened windows like empty eyes watching her approach. It had been locked and abandoned for years, but tonight a faint light flickered within. The heavy wooden doors creaked open with surprising ease, revealing a grand but decayed interior. Dust coated every surface, and the air smelled of mildew and age. Lila's footsteps echoed as she moved cautiously down the main aisle, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. At the center of the room, beneath the high vaulted ceiling, stood a table. On it lay a large leather-bound book, its cover embossed with intricate designs that matched the symbols on the shard. Her heart pounded as she approached. The whispers grew louder, though still faint, as if urging her forward. She hesitated, then reached out and opened the book. The pages were filled with handwritten entries, diagrams, and sketches of the shard she now carried. The handwriting shifted with each entry, as if multiple people had contributed to its creation. One phrase, however, repeated throughout. "There brings balance." Flipping through, she found an entry dated over a century ago. The writer spoke of an ancient ritual performed every New Year's Eve in the town square. A ritual meant to keep the balance between the living and the dead. The bonfire acted as a gateway, fueled by offerings, and the shard, which served as the key. But one year, the ritual had failed. The shard had been stolen, its power interrupted, and the gateway had been left ajar. The town had suffered for it. Fires swept through homes, residents vanished without explanation, and the whispers began. Those who remained eventually fled, leaving the town to its fate. Leela's breath quickened as she read the final line of the entry. Only by returning the shard and completing the ritual can the balance be restored. A sudden creak from above made her jump. She shone her flashlight toward the balcony, where a figure stood watching her. Unlike the skeletal apparition from the square, this figure appeared human, draped in a long, tattered cloak. "You found it," the figure said, its voice low and resonant. "Who are you?" Lila demanded, her voice trembling. The figure descended the stairs slowly, the shadows clinging to them like a second skin. "A guardian," they said. "One of many, tasked with ensuring the shard's safekeeping. But we failed." "Bad?" Lila's grip tightened on the shard in her pocket. "What happens if I return it?" "The balance will be restored," the guardian replied. "The gateway will close, and the voices will finally rest. But the ritual demands a sacrifice." Lila's stomach dropped. What kind of sacrifice? The guardian stepped closer, their face still obscured. "One who bears the mark. One who has carried the shard and awakened its power." The weight of their words settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She was the sacrifice. "What's the problem?" inquired the man. The whispers swirled around her now, their tone urgent and pleading. Images of the skeletal figure and the fiery circle flashed in her mind. The shard in her pocket grew warm once more, pulsing faintly against her palm. "You don't have to do this," the guardian said softly. "But if you choose to leave, the gateway will remain open, and the voices will grow louder, stronger." Lila's mind raced. The thought of giving up her life was terrifying, but so was the idea of letting the town, and whatever lay beyond the gateway, consume more lives. She looked at the shard, its glow now steady and calm. It no longer felt like a burden, but a part of her. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm despite the fear coursing through her. The guardian nodded, their expression unreadable. Then, "Follow me." They led her back to the square where the bonfire pit now blazed with renewed light. The snow around it had melted, revealing the ancient symbols carved into the stone. The shard grew brighter in her hand, resonating with the flames. "Place it in the center," the guardian instructed. Lila stepped forward, her heart pounding. As she knelt by the fire, the whispers quieted, replaced by a deep, resounding hum. She placed the shard into the flames, and the symbols around the pit flared to life. The fire roared, rising higher than she thought possible. The hymn intensified, vibrating through her body. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the warmth and the light. The flames curled around her, lighting the world around them. When she opened them again, she was alone. The pit was empty, the shard gone, and the square was silent. The air was still and peaceful. The oppressive weight of the whispers lifted. The balance had been restored. Lila stood in the empty square, the night air strangely still. The bonfire pit, once a roaring vortex of energy, now lay dormant, its stones cool and lifeless. The snow returned, blanketing the ground in a soft, unbroken layer, as though covering up the events of the night. She felt a profound quiet within herself, as if the whispers had not only left the air, but also her mind. The silence wasn't empty, it was peaceful, a deep, comforting calm that she hadn't realized she'd been yearning for. As she gazed around the square, the remnants of the past seemed to blend with the present. The skeletal figure was gone, and the shadowy streets no longer loomed with menace. Instead, the town felt lighter, as though it had finally been freed from the weight of its history. A faint glimmer caught her eye. Where the shard had been consumed by the flames, a small object now lay amidst the ashes. Lila approached cautiously, her steps crunching softly on the snow. She knelt and picked it up. It was a ring, simple, silver, and smooth to the touch. Though unassuming, it carried a warmth that seeped into her skin, filling her with a sense of connection. She slipped it onto her finger, and for a moment, the whispers returned. Not with urgency or fear, but with a gentle farewell. The snow began to fall again, light and delicate, covering the town like a fresh beginning. Lila looked up at the sky, the stars piercing through the clouds like tiny beacons of hope. The hum she had heard earlier was gone, replaced by the natural sounds of the winter night, the soft rustling of wind through the trees, the distant call of an owl, and the rhythmic crunch of her footsteps as she made her way back to the car. When she reached the vehicle, she paused, glancing back at the town. The memories of the night, of the shard, the bonfire, and the guardian lingered, vivid and surreal. Yet there was no regret. She had done what needed to be done, and though the experience had changed her, it had also brought closure. Sliding into the driver's seat, she turned the ignition. The car rumbled to life, its warmth slowly chasing away the lingering chill. As she drove away, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. The town, with its secrets and stories, disappeared in her rearview mirror. But the ring on her finger and the peace in her heart reminded her that she had been part of something greater, a guardian in her own right. As the highway stretched before her, Lila smiled faintly. The new year had arrived, not with fireworks and celebration, but with quiet resolution and the promise of a brighter future. After the end of the first year passed, she prepared for the next, giving herself an hour to complete her to-do list. She didn't know where the road would lead her next, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it. As the first rays of the New Year's sun lit up the horizon, Lila whispered a silent vow, knowing that while the past may echo in whispers, it's the choices in the present that illuminate the path forward.